So Tyler, these are always really casual. We're going to walk through your career from the beginning to now and talk about behavioral science along the way. Folks, thanks for coming today. I'm always happy to have these fireside chats and talk about how people get into their applied behavioral science careers. These are part of BeSci.io, fireside chat theory. And so, Tyler, like you started a long way from applied behavioral science, Mr. Snowboard instructor. Like where did you had like a perpetual love of the outdoors that has it obviously influenced, where you live at the intersection of applied behavioral science and sustainability. So talk to me. Well, I'm not only want to start by talking about applied behavioral science, I want to talk about the outdoors. Where did this sort
Okay.
of like when did you sort of were you like that kid that was always out there? You're in Eagle Scout kind of stuff? Like what where did this come from?
Yeah, I mean, generally, yes. We didn't have Eagle Scouts in Canada, but yeah, generally, from a very early age, I guess it started just with exposure. So like when I was really young, my parents would take us camping every summer, and we would spend a lot of time outdoors, going for hikes, going swimming in lakes and stuff like that. So I that's where it comes from for sure. And that continued as I got a little bit older. Then I get into like high school, and there was an environment club, so I just signed up for that. That was mainly an excuse to go camping, to do more camping. But then we would do like tree plantings and stuff like that. So as a young adult, and if I reflect back on it a little bit too, it's also was like a place where I felt like I belonged in high school. Like that was my club, was the environment club, and we would go out and do what I would now say like pro-social, pro-environmental deeds, tree plantings and fundraisers and stuff like that. But it was always around that. And then like at home, I lived next to a pretty large park, like community park, and it was don't come in until the streetlights turn on, go play at the park all day. And that's how I spend my days. And then in the winter, quintessential Canadian, I would spend my days skating on the pond at the park, and come home when my parents were yelling from the back door, like it's get home. So I was just like you said, perpetually outdoors. That's kind of like, yeah, I spent my youth like climbing trees and stuff like that. Yeah,
Well, but
from a
not
very
just
early age.
outdoors. It sounds like there's also a kind of a service element in there. It wasn't just an excuse to go camping. There was a sustainability theme kind of emerging here as well.
There was, yeah, there definitely was. And this like when I'm talking about high school, like I'm turning 40 next year, so that was, the late 90s. Um, Sustainability wasn't really a word at that time, but environment club, like there was, you know, acid rain and all that kind of stuff, was the ozone layer. That's was the topic of conversation at my level. But it was, yeah, we were doing fundraisers to plant trees. We were doing, like recycle days, like those types of things we did way, way back then, like 20-ish years ago.
Got it. And did you take psych in high school? Like, was there like also a theme that like, hey,
No,
there's going to be some behavior change out there? Like, no, I was too busy being
no,
outdoors.
actually, I was the track that I went in high school was science. I wanted to get into sciences, so I did all of the biology, chemistry, physics. I did all of the science tracks in high school. Um, I wasn't particularly good at them, but I did them. That
I
was
mean,
that
that
was the
counts.
track. Yeah, and then that's where I thought my career was going to go. I'm like jumping ahead now, but I was going to go into kinesiology, and I wanted to be a physiotherapist. So
Oh,
it was like
interesting.
science, and then that's like that was a good job in my mind at a young adolescent age.
But so that's not what you ended up going to college for.
No,
So
no, not
tell
even
me,
close.
so where did that change? Like I know you went to Waterloo. Like,
Yeah,
uh,
yeah. So
but
I'd applied to all of the schools I applied to when I was in high school were kinesiology programs. Um, maybe like 7 or 8 different schools, and one stood out. Waterloo, as you mentioned, the University of Waterloo. They had a new program called Environment and Business. It was a like dual degree co-op program that paired environmental studies with a business degree. And as I mentioned, environment club, and that was kind of where my values were more like pretty square in outdoors, nature, etc. And I just thought, I'll put an application in with this school, see what happens. I ended up getting accepted into a bunch of other schools. I accepted an offer to a school out in the east coast of Canada in Halifax. I signed up. I actually met my roommate for my residence, and then I got a late acceptance into Waterloo. And I remember I had a conversation with my dad, and I was like, you know what? I need to follow my values with environment, scrap the sunk cost with the deposit I've already made, and I'm going to Waterloo and I'm going to do this environment program. And I was the third year, so no one had actually graduated from this program yet. So it was kind of like what is this all about? But it felt like the right choice, and that's what I ended up doing.
And what was it all about? I mean, as they were sort of,
Yeah.
as if we had you had an emerging discipline, what did that environmental program end up being?
It was a mix of like ecology courses, of and some environmental science. There was some courses on environmental assessments, but really like introductory stuff. And then there was these like cross-disciplinary courses on environment and business where we had faculty that were experienced in the world of business, but had like environmental value leaning. So like we had marketing classes, we had marketing professionals teach those classes, but the lens of those were always kind of connected back towards these environmental values. And now the word sustainability was starting to come into play. So we did accounting classes, we did stats classes, like business 101, econ, micro, macro econ classes. But then the other half of those were all these more environmental things. But then a lot of them were around like learning about ISO and what's the 14001 framework and environmental management systems. So we learned about those things, but a lot of that was then around case studies. So let's look at this mining company and what they did with their EA and the policies. So there was a lot of that side of it, but there was definitely a sense, and now like I've stayed in touch with the administrators of that program. It's evolved a lot since that early days of the program. So,
Well, it sounds like
yeah,
you're getting a smattering of everything in this program, right? Right. We've got marketing. There's sort of a business
yeah,
lens in here.
it was kind of like a good breadth of things, but nothing very deep. Like I took 2 stats classes. I wish I did more, because now coming full circle to like where I'm at now, I wish that was a skill set that I was more proficient in. But learned a little about a lot of things.
And you went on to a master's in entrepreneurship and tech. Where did it become clear to you that, hey, this was going to sort of move in that direction?
Kind of serendipitous, actually. So after graduating from that undergrad program, I heard a keynote from this guy from PepsiCo, and I think he was their sustainability director. I think that was his title at the time, but it was like a split role with operations, for a division of PepsiCo Foods, Frito-Lay. So everyone knows the Frito-Lay chips. You've great anecdotes in your book about Doritos. So we were Frito-Lay Canada, and he was in charge of all of the sustainability stuff. One person for all of sustainability, which was probably still true for a lot of companies, but definitely true back in like 2006. And I just went up to him after this keynote and I said, what you guys are doing at PepsiCo sounds really, really cool. I'm kind of this mindset that if I want to affect change, I need to do it from inside big companies. They have the largest impact. So if I can get them to change the way they do business, then that's how I make my impact on sustainability in the world. So I had this conversation with this guy, and he's, yeah, come join Pepsi. So I started with an internship there, and this was actually around 2008, because that's
Yeah.
when the bubble burst and they put hiring freezes on. So I interned at PepsiCo for about 2 years, and at that point in time, I was starting to think about like where's my career going? What's next? And this program at Waterloo, this master's in business and entrepreneurship and technology came up, and it just really interests me because I always had this entrepreneurial edge or this entrepreneurial drive, and I thought, okay, well, this is the kind of context I'm in right now, with this economic downturn. I'm just gonna go do my own thing. So I decided let's do this program, but it was really geared towards like engineers and developers. For their Waterloo, for those that may not know, is kind of the tech capital of Canada. So it's really geared to like, what's the next startup going to be, tech startup going to be? And then I come in as this environmental graduate, this environmental studies grad, first one that had ever been in the program. And I'm like, no, I want to start a business to like do sustainability stuff here. So that's kind of where how I went into that program. Yeah.
I mean, it is something that we hear. Having done enough of these now, there are some sort of emerging macro trends about what makes somebody a good applied behavioral scientist, and that entrepreneurial streak, right? Because you're in a field that didn't exist for your point about sustainability, right? Like applied behavioral science is newer than sustainability is, right? And so you have to kind of want to be on the edge of something to be willing to go into and fight the fights that have to happen to do this thing. I love that ironically your drive came from Pepsi, where there's one guy doing this thing, right? Like, so, you're sort of seeing this this entrepreneurship sort of thing inside of a company, and that says, okay, well, I'm going to go off and do this thing. Were you embraced in the community of tech I know Waterloo like has sort of that bent. Did you feel like you got integrated into that community well, or were they like, okay, that's the weird green guy over there?
Uh, Actually, yes, I did. And in the program specifically, it became very clear from like day one that my intangible qualities, let's call them, were very much opposite to a lot of the other people in the program. So, I'm was a drama student in high school as well. Like I'm that type of person. Um, so I on the like marketing creative, I'm a musician as well. So like that right brain side of the way I approach things was a really good fit to some of the, well, let's just call it left brain side of what a lot of the other people were bringing around the table. So as a team member, I fit in really well in kind of the glue between folks. And then the larger community, yeah, I mean, this program was really good at making connections. So, we went down to Boston a number of times and met, I pitched at VCs, like fake pitching it with these VC firms. So it exposed me to that world, and that kind of gave me a little bit of credibility in the tech community in Waterloo. Also, just found people to be generally very welcoming. But the other thing that was very unique for Waterloo is it also had a very rapidly growing sustainability community, and they were starting to be like intertwined. We'd all these old buildings, and there was some gentrification going on in the downtown Kitchener area. And the nonprofits got cheap rent, and then the tech companies got cheap rent, and they were kind of like right beside each other. So like the Communitech, the accelerator hub, the tech accelerator in Waterloo, was literally right next to this group called Sustainable Waterloo Region. Like, so they had a hallway that connected the building to go down to the pub. So yeah, it was very much like this cross-pollination where you had these sustainability people working in the same spaces as these tech people. That's probably changed a bit now. That like I'm talking like 15 years ago at this point.
So that, they're like, you're going for a drink, I'm also going for a drink, let us have the drink together, and then got that cross-pollination. Yeah. For you, you started out in this very science place. Were you still interested in science? Had that kind of gone dormant for a little while? I mean, sustainability obviously has science elements, but you didn't go off and choose to be an environmental engineer, for example. Like, how does science fold into this story for you?
I've always been interested in science. Like I mentioned, I didn't get the great grades early on in science. So it was more those like soft skills came a lot easier to me. So I kind of followed the policy route from a sustainability perspective. So my first real sustainability job was at an engineering company. but doing policy work. And this was an engineering company that focused on the transportation industry. So we were working with agencies, building roads and highways and bridges and things like that, or development projects. And then I started looping in I guess we could call it science, but I started doing more like carbon accounting work, and learning like the ISO standards and how to do sustainability reporting. So we would start working on these like large highway projects, and how do we quantify the carbon footprint of a highway, both from its construction and then its use. And this is when carbon accounting was also in its sort of early days. So I kind of developed a little niche expertise in that. But it was, yeah, it was, I learned a lot more about like working with people, like steering committees and managing groups, and kind of more now I would look back on it and think a bit more of like, how do I influence and change behavior in these groups to get the outcomes that we believe are, the best for the environment and the best for the organizations we're working with. So we did a lot of working with folks with those more technical disciplines, and synthesizing. We wrote a number of guides for the industry. We worked on a number of environmental assessments and things like that. So I guess along my journey, I've always maintained an interest in the sciences, and it was reading books about neurology or neuroscience, and music. There's a number of authors that I've always been really fascinated about music in the brain. So I've always had this like personal interest in the sciences. But to be very open with you, it is an area where I've kind of felt like I don't have the technical skills in a world of sustainability where that's what people were looking for at those times,
Right.
or what companies were looking for. Like, you need to be a lot of companies when I graduated were looking for environmental sciences,
Mhm.
but having a degree in, biology or geology wasn't going to get me a job at Pepsi to do sustainability work. So it would be very well suited to do like consulting work, where I'm actually going out and doing like hydrogeology, or um, you know endangered species work or things like that. So um, yeah, I guess that I'm kind of meandering now on the science question.
That's all right. Look, we're applied behavioral scientists. We love a good meander. You called out there, hey, looking back, there was an opportunity for behavior change there in the policy work. But there's another thing that you talked about there that I think is worth pulling out, which is the sort of making intangibles tangible, right? This notion of, hey, I'm going to talk about not just the sort of environmental impact of building this road, but sort of the ongoing impact of using this road, right? Which at now we're much more sophisticated about how we do that sort of math. But at the time, I mean, that was you know, you're trying to sort of figure out the right way to measure something that is difficult to measure, which we hear a lot in applied behavioral science, right? Much of applied behavioral science, even if we can get people to articulate the behavior they want, there's always that as measured by part of the behavioral statement that is hard for people. Did you get a lot of pushback in the new, as you're doing this, like, you're trying to understand the sustainability impact of something, which often, is at odds with what, people would like to say that sustainability impact is low, right? And so how did you deal with that sort of measurement phenomenon?
Yeah, to be very honest with you, that's right around where I started feeling a little bit disillusioned, where our clients were these large developer companies, and the sustainability side of this work was really just a check mark to get projects approved. So, working with my colleagues on the more science side, so the ecologists that were doing, endangered species reporting, and then some of the more sustainability certifications that you could get. My small team and I started, really seeing that, we're just the check mark on the project, or we're the innovation points on the bid, um, but ultimately, are the things we're doing actually being used? And that was I never could get a good answer. And it's like we prepared a number of great guidebooks on how to build a greener road or a greener bridge or whatever it might be. And I mean, with the behavioral science lens looking backwards now, you know, we would have rolled those out completely differently, um, to make sure that they were actually used. But yeah, so that was around the time where I started looking for a new direction for me.
And and
So
that brought you to Wilfrid Laurier, right?
that's right. Yeah. So the university, which was in Kitchener, in Waterloo, I took a job leading the sustainability office at the university, which is like a mid-sized Canadian university. Uh, Again, it was an operational role still, but a university is like a microcosm of a city. So you've got all the different functions that you need, to manage and reduce our environmental impact and more broadly sustainability. Um, so it was a really great step forward for me, from that angle, but it's also really what opened my eyes to the world of behavior change. That's where I like really started, to discover it and see the the power, I guess, that it has, or the importance that it has. And in my mind was climate action. Like how do we get people to take climate action seriously and companies take climate action seriously? And it was at the university where I first. It was right around that time where I think it was Nature journal published an article about, you know, information and education is not changing behaviors. It's we keep we keep running, like the IPCC keeps putting out these reports and no one does anything about them. And so that's where I started realizing then we need to do something else. And I have this group here at this university. I have 17,000 students, 1,500 staff, and every year I get a new batch of students that I can start working on more engagement. How do I work with the people to make change? Um, and it was also right around that time where I read Nudge for the first time, and that was like, okay, here's actual things I can do. Like I can, and I think this is probably true for a lot of people that discover the behavioral science field is like, well, I'm just going to take what they did and then do it here, and it's going to work. I'm going to use this nudge and do that. So that's what I started doing. I just would read something and thought, that's fascinating. I'm going to try that in my context. And sometimes they worked and sometimes they didn't work. But I was able to start over, 6 or 7 years at the university, um, start trying different programs and seeing what worked and doing small things or big things, and then starting to be more informed by the data as well. So looking for opportunities and validating that, to actually design. Now I would call it design and intervention, but at that point, that's not the language I used.
Well, yes, but you can post hoc the language, right? So you go.
Yes, yes.
It's another theme we sometimes hear, right? People go through this period of disillusionment where they realize that whatever they're doing isn't working, right? Whether it's education or being a checkbox on somebody's sustainability plan or whatever it is. There's this period where you have to sort of fail a little bit before you come to a behavioral science like, oh, maybe there's a way to do something different. Maybe there's a way to challenge this sort of status quo of like, you know, we'll just educate people to death and somehow magically they'll then become sustainable. And also, this is I like the point that you made about operations, right? This is a point where you have a little more power, a little more control, right? As an outside consultant on a road, the checkbox on sustainability. Here you have some authority, even if it's sort of influence authority, inside of a microcosm to actually make change. And that's another thing that we hear is like seeking out jobs where rather than being purely an advisor, you have that ability to be an accountable person, to be able to say, hey, I'm accountable for this thing, and I'm therefore going to be able to, be rewarded and take risk on my ability to experiment. How did you get to Nudge? Did somebody like you saw it in a bookstore and you read it? Somebody gave it to you? Like, do you remember how you got there?
Yeah, I can't remember that actually. I have no idea. I mean, it was so long ago now. I'm not sure. But it was for sure the first thing I read about behavioral science was Nudge. Um, I
And did
don't
you
think I bought the book. Like I don't even remember. I must have got it from the library or something. No,
and did
no,
you
no one gave it to me, so I discovered it somewhere and picked it up. Yeah, but
did you have the immediate feeling that like this was like did the light bulb go on, or you sort of were reading
Yeah.
it and then, yeah, I mean, you
No, no,
immediately knew.
it was a light bulb moment. Yeah, it was 100% a light bulb moment. It was like this aha, this is the thing that I've been missing. And it was like, then you think, okay, well, if I were to do it again, I would have gone back and I would have done a program in social psychology. Um, and and since then I've taken social psychology, like continued ed classes and online courses and things like that. And amazing, like the MOOCs that you can find. Like I've taken social psych courses from Stanford, from U of T, um, and they're really great. And then all of the behavioral science online courses now too, from like Dan Ariely and Rory Sutherland, and like a bunch of them, like and you of course. And I have your book right there. So like then I started like like Nudge was the watershed moment. And then I became like, what else can I read? Whatever I could find, I started proactively searching it out and looking for books and courses and blogs and articles. And I did as much. I tried to absorb as much as I possibly could, and then I would write down the things that I thought were applicable in my role and that I could test out. So I'd find examples, and and then there's people that are doing really good work. And in Canada, there's a guy, Doug Mackenzie Moore. I'm not sure if he's a name that's flies in these circles, but so started learning from him a little bit, and there were now some like databases of examples of, like, he called it community-based social marketing at that time. I think maybe still does, but it's basically the same thing. It's applied behavioral science. So started looking at what examples can I use that apply in the sustainability context. But then at the university, I started very clearly realizing that presenting a business case should, in a rational mind, answer the question of whether we should do this or not, if there's a benefit to doing it. And there were years we were presenting a positive business case to our facilities team, specifically our fleet manager, to at the end of life for our vehicles to replace them with hybrid or electric vehicles. It was a perfect use case on a campus. And it was just never even looked at, just stonewalled all the time. And then one day we brought an electric vehicle to campus, and we had this like demo day, and we had all of local community EV owners come and bring their cars to our parking lot. And our fleet manager came and test drove, I think it was a Chevy Bolt. It was like literally the next day they bought one.
Experiences matter, man. Strong
Yes.
promoting pressure.
So it was like these someone said, like, listen to the whispers. It was like these whispers kept coming in, like, okay, well, the presenting the business case or the technical side of it is not making the change. So then what are the other ways we can influence getting that change? And then we started seeing these things happen. So it was kind of like a snowball effect, starting with Nudge. Yeah.
And were you kind of on your own? This is something you brought to the office, and you felt like you started to bring the team on board. So you're like doing behavioral science at home and bringing it in, or this is something you're bringing everybody else along
Oh,
on the journey?
no, I didn't talk about it as behavioral science. No. And my team, we had a one person, two person, then 3 person team. And then I would recruit students to help me do things. Who's going to listen to this quote unquote old guy when you've got like 17-year-olds that are like, why are you even talking to me, old man? But again, that's kind of like social proof a an approach. Um, so the more I could learn about these things, the more I would do that. But yeah, no, I didn't talk about it in a behavioral science language at that time. It was more like, here's the program or project we're going to try out, and here's like how we're going to build this and design the program. I was looking at it from those lenses. So like we partnered with our alumni and development alumni relations for fundraising, and all the campaigns we built through that for sustainability projects 100% had like a behavioral science approach. So like everything from how we anchor the fundraising options to how we make them vivid and salient to how we promoted them on social media, and all of those things all had a behavioral science approach. Like, but again, they were more like, here are the examples I see. I'm going to try them here. And there was like 3 years in a row where we had the most successful fundraising campaigns, um, whether maybe it's sustainability, we're speaking to people at that time, or maybe it was, I didn't test them out. Like I didn't A/B test those things, or so I can't say for sure it was the behavioral science approaches that worked. Um, but everything I did at the university, I started approaching it from a behavioral science lens.
Mm-hmm. And then you wrap up there and move on. What was that transition like? Did you feel like you had done what you wanted to do at the university, right? So there, before you ended up at EcoVadis where you are now, which I do want to talk about,
Yeah.
you went to work for Green Economy Canada, you did some other things. Tell me a little bit about that journey.
Yeah, I guess to answer your first question, I did feel like I'd done. I was proud of the work I did at the university. I felt like we accomplished a lot there. There was one thing I wish I had stayed on a little bit longer. The last thing that I'd worked on was a partnership with our food services. We had, in our annual waste reporting, we had waste diversion targets to reach. And in our annual reporting, we would do annual waste audits, and we knew that we had some high levels of organics contamination at various points across campus, typically close to our food service locations, not surprisingly. Um, so we wanted to target that, and I had students go out at those locations with just like a clipboard and just observe. And we had attended to interview students like, why did you put that piece of garbage in that bin versus this bin? Like, what was the decision making process? And we very quickly learned that there wasn't one. They just weren't even looking, where they were walking by on their cell phones and just throwing at whatever bin was there. So that was a really good learning for us, because now we could start testing different design elements, like putting rumble strips or putting lids on the approach to date. And we had like a cross Canada group of sustainability managers from different universities and colleges, and we were all talking about, how do we put better colors on these bins? How do we put better pictures and have lists of what goes in the bins? Put shadow boxes with the actual items you can buy at the food court on top of the hole that it's supposed to go in. And no one was talking about, no, it's because they're just not even looking. So it was a big eye opener for us. So then we started testing some of those different design elements. We started working with food services on things like changing the framing on our menus to encourage reusable options, and some better rewards and incentives to do those things. So we had just started doing those things when I left. So I wasn't around to see like what was the effect on all of those things we started trying out. So that was my one regret, is that I would have stayed a little bit longer just to see, like, did it work?
This is the career trap of all applied behavioral scientists. There's never
Yeah.
a good time to leave, right? Because if you're doing your job, you're always running a bunch of different experiments. You're always running through sprints and things. And so there's always this, well, I won't leave till the next thing ends so that I can
Yeah.
see how that thing ends. And the problem is that by the time you get to that one, you'll have started something else, and then you'll have that same feeling. It can be very hard to leave an environment because you're there's always that one more thing, one more thing, one more thing.
Yeah.
Is there something that you did at the college that you um now looking back you would have done differently, knowing what you know more about sort of formalized behavioral science, either methodologically or on a specific project?
Methodologically, I would have done more pilots. I would have piloted things and tested them out, rather than design a program, launch it, and then iterate it. So like, I guess, large piloting versus small piloting. I would have done more small piloting for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Just because the hit rate of, you can spend a lot of energy spinning something up that's not going to work.
Yeah.
Which is exhausting for you and exhausting for the team. And I totally get that. And how did
But
you end up at, go ahead.
well, I was going to say, then moving to Green Economy Canada, I was looking for there. I mean, there's part of a catalyst in that my first son was born and we moved cities, so I needed to look for a new place to work. But I also wanted to scale up impact, so I found this role at Green Economy Canada, which was a remote-based national nonprofit that worked with local and regional hubs of businesses to reduce their carbon footprint. So I was responsible as the network engagement manager to work with the local teams to support those businesses across Canada, and we had, a network of 350 businesses, all trying to set targets, quantify their footprint, and then put in action plans to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions. So that was kind of like the next step in terms of scale and impact. Now I'm working with a national network, and we're working with businesses doing meaningful climate action. So that was kind of the next step for me. And I was there for a few years on that leading kind of engagement. And I continued this work of like all the things I'm doing. How do I bring behavioral science approaches along with me in those types of things?
Did you notice this? I mean, I know you were taking bite-sized steps forward in your education, right? Like you just are a naturally inquisitive person, as far as I could tell, right? In my experiences with you, and so you tend to be always, you're always learning something. Did you feel like you were getting better at it consciously, or was it all happening so gradually that sort of a slow boil?
I mean, a little bit of both. I started I started becoming, if I would say, like my vocabulary of behavioral biases was growing, and I could, I'd be talking with somebody like, oh, like we could try this principle or this tactic. There's a bias here or a heuristic that might fit here. So I those things I could start recalling and being more like well versed in, and I found myself talking about like, yeah, there was this study done that showed this. I could pull those things up now, like out of my back pocket. So in that sense, yes, but still felt like I didn't have a framework to approach this on. It was more just like in the moment, what are the things I think that we might be able to try out? So no formal approach to, like jumping to now, using, your book Start at the End and your approach, or others. And maybe it was around this time where I started learning about different frameworks. This probably I was more interested in like, what is the formal way to do this? Like I'm
Yeah.
kind of just chipping away at it here, and I'm not a trained behavioral scientist. I didn't go to school for any of this. So like, how do the experts actually do this? And I started
Yeah.
learning
So
about different models, like BCom and the other ones that all.
yeah. So in some ways, you're growing from a behavioral uh, designer, right? This like, hey, I now have an encyclopedic knowledge, or at least some knowledge of like what's worked elsewhere, papers, like where we might start, to more of a behavioral science leader. Hey, how do I run a macro process on top of this, potentially sort of directing other people in this piece? And then you end up at um, I know you were at Planet A for a while. Um, how did you end up there, and then how did that transition to EcoVadis?
That was a independent consultancy I started on the side. So this was now we get into COVID. So COVID and employment opportunities it was hard to find work at that point in time. So before I joined Green Economy Canada, I started a consulting company and had a few clients just through my network. But yeah, that was brought the behavioral science approach there too. But yeah, that was more of a blip on the radar during COVID than anything else, I'd say. But that Green Economy Canada and behavioral science definitely is what got me to EcoVadis. So now I'm here as the head of customer marketing for our rated customers, which we can get into a little bit about what that means. But essentially,
I
we
was gonna
have a
say you have
network.
to define that a little
Yeah,
bit. Like, so
we
maybe
have.
maybe just say a word or two about what
Yeah,
EcoVadis does, because I think it'll contextualize what you're doing
yeah,
there.
yeah. So EcoVadis is we are a SaaS company, a tech company, and our main flagship platform is a sustainability ratings for businesses. So um, whether you're a small, medium-sized company and you want to know how you're performing across globally recognized sustainability criteria, or you're a larger company that wants to know how their supply chain's performing, you can come to EcoVadis and undertake our questionnaire, and that provides a rating that's aligned with multiple global standards on sustainability, and it allows you to share that rating with your customers or with your other stakeholders to show you like, no, like this is the journey we're on in sustainability, or this is kind of the successes and achievements we've had. So we have we've done about over 200,000 ratings for businesses, and that's of about 120, 130,000 businesses globally have received a rating. And my role is customer marketing for rated companies. So basically, how do we engage and communicate with this group across their entire life cycle, from all the way from the acquisition funnel through to customer retention and advocacy?
Yeah, you're in an interesting position, right? Because in many ways, you're trying to change the behavior of these companies through a particular lens, right? You're not in the company. You're trying to enable someone else to change the behavior. So you're in some ways doing a lot of behavioral science, teaching. How are you sort of bringing experimentation? EcoVadis was not in a particularly experimentatory place when you came. Like, how are you bringing experimentation into sort of your daily work?
Well, I joined at an interesting time because our company is in hyper growth for the last couple of years now. And my role didn't exist before I joined the company. So I was able to bring kind of like a fresh approach. And I'm also not a marketer. Like I mentioned very briefly, I took marketing courses, but I kind of navigated my career towards this like engagement and how do we work with individuals and influence their decisions. So that is marketing essentially. And that's why I was hired for this role, because they were looking for someone that could bring what's called like an out of the box perspective to engaging with our customers. Um, so it was kind of like I could write my own ticket in a certain sense. I was given some leeway to bring in new approaches, and my director was very much on board with the behavioral science, applied behavioral science field. Didn't know a lot about it, but definitely saw the value in how we might leverage it to influence our customers, primarily from like a let's help them improve their sustainability performance, but then as a business too, like how do we convert them, how do we get them to increase their subscriptions and expansion and those types of things as well, which are important for a company. But
100%. Yeah, we hear that all the time. On the show that, like, hey, you have to, there has to be tangible business outcome, or you're sort of dead in the water, right? You have to be able to drive those things that the business cares about, that the business feels strongly about,
yeah.
alongside the other things that you're doing. When you sort of pitched them on writing your own JD, like, did you come in sort of saying like, hey, applied behavioral science, this is a lens and a thoughtful place that you want to go, or did that come once you were sort of in role?
A bit of both. I didn't pitch it as like this is how we're going to structure my role, and applied behavioral science is going to be a key component of that. But when I very much talked about these are approaches we can use in our work to influence customers across the different stages of their life cycle. But then once I started working with our internal stakeholders, we were continually getting questions from whether it's our product teams or our membership teams or even our finance teams. How do we get our customers to do this? And they come to marketing to help with that. And typically it was, can we send an email to get our customers to do X, Y, Z? And we started saying, well, let's not jump to email. Let's think about the problem and what data do we have that we can discover what the problem actually is. So we proposed on a few projects, let's actually use a behavioral science approach and try this out in a more structured way. And that's right around the time where I read your book and got introduced and cold called you, or found out you had open office hours, which was amazing. And then through your guidance, we started actually putting that in place, and I was able to pitch that approach of let's look at insight validation. Let's go through the framework that kind of you proposed in your book, and that was well received. And then we started getting more questions like, how do we get our companies in our network to report their carbon footprint? How do we get them to set carbon reduction targets? So we did another behavioral science kind of workshop on that focus area. And we started making like murmurings across the company and getting some visibility from more senior level folks in the business, and getting their support as well. And then that kind of led to our most recent iteration on how do we influence companies to improve their score and their performance on sustainability. And that's brought us to our most recent kind of more formal round of piloting in a way that looking back across my roles, this is how I would have done it from the start, and now we're at the point now where we're going to be able to report on these current pilots that are running today, and the intention is that we can then better establish this as an approach to problem solving.
Love it. So it feels like what I'm hearing is, people are asking behaviorally oriented questions. How do we get people to do this thing? And I love your point about and they're asking marketing because everybody thinks marketing is the way to get people to do things,
Yeah.
right? There's this sort of and it'll be an email and it'll be a communication from marketing. Like marketing will know this thing. And I love that you're pushing back and saying okay, well, is there a way to solve this in the product? Is there a way to solve this somewhere else? Right, that isn't this very specific, sort of singular monolithic place.
And then even at the email, if it is an email, then it's how do we write the copy? What's the messaging going to be? What's the cadence going to be? When do we send the email? At what point in their journey? And what's the context of their whole customer experience at that point? And I mean, I enjoy writing. I like copywriting. I'm maybe one of the few that actually thoroughly enjoys that. So I always bring it back to our teams about let's be very thoughtful about the words we're using in our copy, and how what behavioral science tools can we bring when we're copywriting, when we have a good understanding of what the audience is and what the problem that we're trying to solve is as well. So even at the email level, so then it's we can frame it this way, or we can leverage the social proof element. We have a huge network, so that is something we can lean into when it's appropriate to do so.
Yeah, I love that, and you've had a creative streak all sort of through your career, right? You're a musician. You have this other sort of place. I love the way that you blend your more. One of the criticisms sometimes of applied behavioral science is people, particularly designers and things, are like, oh man, this is going to crush our creativity. This is going to keep us from, doing the things that we want. Do you feel tension between the sort of science and creative part of yourself? Do you feel like those work in harmony? Tell me a little bit about that.
I actually find it is working in harmony. It's it's the center of my Venn diagram. This is like I told you before early in this conversation, when I discovered Nudge, I was like, this is the thing that I've been looking for. It's the intersection of all the things. And then I can use that thing for whatever I want. I want to use it for sustainability goals, and working with businesses at scale to take climate action seriously and improve the world we live in. Use behavioral science for good. So it absolutely kind of hits that sweet spot. And I'm also a very data-driven person. So I want to see the data, and I want to see the proof, or what is the effect that we're seeing, or what signals do we have. So I'm constantly looking for that, as you put in your book, is that like that cross validation or convergent validation. I'm constantly looking for that, and what insights can we discover and then use, and then tracking our interventions, or tracking the work that we're doing to see, is it actually, are we doing it? Are we achieving that? But then when it comes to the thinking about how we design interventions, that creative side is probably my favorite thing. It's the thing of my role that I like doing the most. And copywriting too, that's at the very specific level, thinking about how we frame the communications and message to a certain audience. What are the things I think are going to work here, and then what's informing my thinking. So that creative side of it is a very fulfilling part of my work. Absolutely.
Where do you feel the most challenge, right? If we think about sort of side, right? Strategy, insights, design, evaluation. You said, hey, I love the design part, right? I feel very fluent in that. Where do you feel, is it getting your stakeholders to express the behaviors that they want to change? I mean, one of the hard parts of sustainability all the time is people come to me and they're like, we want to make people more sustainable. I'm like, cool, what do you mean? Right?
Yeah.
what is it you physically, literally want someone to do? Is it getting your stakeholders to articulate that? Is it the process of generating insights? I mean, you're a little bit removed, right? Because you're influencing sustainability managers at company who then influence their company to be more sustainable. Is it the insights hop, or, is it getting stuff into pilot and sort of having the mechanization and the operationalization of pilots?
Yeah, it's kind of all of those things, to be honest. But I mean, if I answer like very broadly speaking, what is my biggest challenge? I'd say it's that I'm not able to do this with 100% of my bandwidth. If
Yeah.
I could do this work, and that's my sole focus would be on taking this approach to the problems we have, or the challenges we have from a customer perspective in terms of getting them to score improve or whatever it might be. So that can't do this with 100% of my time. Uh,
Yeah.
there's still all the other marketing responsibilities that fall under me that my team has to deliver on. So that's one thing. So it's just like the bandwidth of people to actually carry this process out. I think we've done a really good job of promoting this approach within our company, and that's the journey we're on still, to continue to influence others in the company and reach more senior levels, to get buy-in and use this across more focus areas. Then another challenge is just the data, is getting the data. Like you and I have talked a lot about things are theoretically knowable. The data exists, but getting it in a useful way or an accessible, useful way that can inform our decisions, or then that we can track our pilots. That's a challenge, and that's a challenge that we continue to work on as well with our data teams and engineering teams. So those would
Yeah.
be some of the big ones. Yeah.
So some of that infrastructure to be able to deploy and measure and understand what's going on, right? And they're interrelated, right? If it were easier to run a pilot, if it were easier to measure things, it would take comparatively less of your time, right? And so wouldn't be as competitive. In a bandwidth constrained environment, inhibiting pressures rule the day, right? And it's just, it can be really hard to sort of get stuff done. What's next for you, right? Like EcoVadis goes away tomorrow. Is there a dream job? Is there a place you want to take this? Uh, I know at EcoVadis, like, hey, I want to spend more time on this. Like, I'd
Yeah.
love to see EcoVadis, make you chief behavioral officer and create that sort of dedicated time for you. But, is there a future out there that if you weren't doing this, what would you be doing?
Yeah. I mean, I I think my dream job is to do this at EcoVadis. I very much believe in what we're doing here and the impact we could have with our network, of businesses across the globe. But if EcoVadis didn't exist or like vanished tomorrow, I would be looking for a role where I could run a team to do pilots full time. Find what is our business goal or a business challenge, or organizational challenge if it's not at a for-profit company, um, and do this. This is kind of like, it's been that spark with nudge all the way to now that it's kind of started to crystallize that this is what I want to do with my time, and use behavioral science as a way to positively affect the world we live in. So whether that would be at another company, um, scale is important to me. So that's why EcoVadis is a really good fit. So I'd be looking for somewhere where I could run a team, a behavioral science team, and run pilots, scale those pilots, at scale, for positive change.
I love
That's
that.
the tree hugger in me from when I was a kid is comes full circle.
Well, and so let's end there. Like, do you still get out in the wilderness? I know, like you spent your childhood in the wilderness. You spent your teenage and formative years in the wilderness. You were a snowboard instructor. You were doing mountain rescue, doing all these things. Do you still get out? You've got young kids, right?
Yeah, I have a 2 and a 4-year-old, two boys, and yeah, we take them camping every summer. We get out as much as possible. We get one of the things that around that time that I mentioned that like Nature article, was exposure to nature seemed to be one of the most important things to get people to align their values and identity with climate action. So just being in nature makes you think more about protecting nature and taking actions to do so. So, not to mention, the positive mental and health benefits of just being in nature as well, and appreciating its beauty. But so yeah, we get out all the time. Yeah, as much as possible, we get out to go for hikes or go camping or do whatever. You know what? I was looking for that paper before this call because I knew I was going to drop it as one of the milestones in my journey. I couldn't find it in the 2 minutes I Googled, but I will continue looking for that. It was circa like 2013, probably right around there, 2014 maybe. It was definitely a Nature article. Yeah, if you track it down before me, please post it to the group. But it was a special issue. It was a special issue all about this, like, information overload is not working for climate action.
I mean, if there's anything that behavioral science has taught us, it's that education, while globally very successful over time for lots of things, is not particularly good at motivating individual and specific action for very narrow things. Thanks so much for joining me today, Tyler. It's always such a pleasure to interact with you. I love this intersection of sustainability and behavioral science. It is a growing and emerging trend. We see tons and tons and tons of sustainability consultancies and behavioral scientists starting to pair up and work together on really creating the kind of change that we do need in the world. And I really appreciate you for doing the work and joining us today and inspiring people with your story. I love that you didn't come to behavioral science, in college and decide that's what you were going to do for the rest of your life. You said, hey, this is a tool, this is a method to accomplish something that I really care about. And I love the experimental work that you've done. Well, we'll get this posted. We'll post the paper alongside it so that people can and we'll leave you with, hey, everybody get outside today, go for a walk, get things done. We'll see you all on down the road. Tyler, thanks so much for joining us.
Awesome. Thank you, Matt. Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure.
Bye, everybody.